political dividend that it offers. But its appeal gains traction because the rank and file, including us if we are also rank and file, the rank and file accepts the undesirability of others and their exclusion from rights and equality. So we have to be mindful of that as well. Now, what are the types of violations that arise in the field of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion? We know this. It includes mass violations as well as individual cases. It relates to daily exclusions and infringements, hatred, torture, or even murder or executions. And it can emerge along a number of fault lines: interreligious, intra-religious, sectarian. Michael told me not to use that word, but I stand to be corrected. And also the fault line between religion and non-religion. And those infringements don't only relate to the right to have, adopt, change religion or belief and manifest it, including with others and in public, but they include also the rights to education, to work, to expression, to interacting freely with others and without fear. Now, let me try and observe something that seems to be positive in international fora on freedom of religion or belief. I haven't experienced any frontal attacks on the importance and relevance of freedom of religion or belief, or indeed in the interactive dialogue in this 3 years and 8 months, no state has come up and said that freedom of religion or belief is a Western construct. So, I mean, is that good? I mean, maybe this would have been a very common criticism in the 80s and the 90s. At least at the level of rhetoric, and as assessed in these interactive dialogues and exchanges, it is accepted as a human right and at home in those settings. I've not even experienced an outright denial of the right to change religion or belief. Now, have states just learned to play the game and to become less forthright in actually their policies and their actions, or have we gained some traction in the basics of freedom of religion or belief? In all of this work, NGOs are the critical actors. In country visits, in allegation letters, in other communications, they provide the reality check at the UN Human Rights Council, in Universal Periodic Review, in the country visits. Of course, I'm excluding gongos from this, because what they do is they repeat exactly what the state line is. And also, I want to recognize that NGOs can also be very partial in their support of freedom of religion or belief. But nevertheless, the reality check that they bring in is absolutely critical to this work. And networks are also very helpful in keeping freedom of religion or belief in check and on the agenda, and promoting understanding of freedom of religion or belief. I think Ribeiro and Mohr might have been quite lonely in the mandate in trying to handle all of this on their own, but there are many actors that support freedom of religion or belief, and indeed are much better supported than the mandates in being able to carry forward that work. Nevertheless, so I've tried to be positive, but when the human right, freedom of religion or belief, is brought up in international fora or elsewhere, just because it's brought up doesn't mean we're on the same page. There was a classic 3 weeks ago where a government approached me to say that what I referred to as an anti-conversion law was actually a religious freedom law. And then you think, right, so we changed the word, but let's go to the reality of it. So yes, we're definitely not giving it the same definition and not upholding it as a human right, even though we're using the term. Everyone perhaps assumes they know what freedom of religion or belief means, but they do so without regarding it as a human right, which leads to it being twisted and misused, which in turn risks freedom of religion or belief being hollowed out and rendered impotent from defending rights equally for all. And support for freedom of religion or belief can wane as a result of this manipulation or narrowing of it. So, having tried to be positive, very hesitantly, let's also mention the negative. Mass violations of freedom of religion or belief persist. Perhaps there's two ways that we can understand mass violations in terms of severity or longevity. Longevity draws our attention to the persistent of very entrenched cases of violations of freedom of religion or belief, some of which have persisted much longer than the mandate. They go beyond the 40-year mark. There is greater information, and there are more cases that are brought to the fore, indeed far beyond the mandate, right? I mean, the 2000 communications is only one capture of it. They're being brought up in by envoys and ambassadors and NGOs, and there are other visits and networks happening on freedom of religion or belief. There's internal conversations on freedom of religion or belief. So there's a lot more information. What I feel on my shoulders as, the most heavy burden is these long-standing cases. And if I can just give an indication of it, one could have a very long list. But Uyghurs in China, Uyghur Muslims in China, it carries on, it persists. Ahmadis in Pakistan, there could be a weekly allegation letter on it. Christians in Nicaragua, just being one example, Baha'is in Iran being another. These are decades long and persisting. They are so long-standing that they risk becoming just a fact of life and normalized and almost acceptable. States and bad faith actors have become masters at obfuscating such cases, at using social media to detract from them, and from maneuvering and alleging legal grounds for these violations. Now, there's also the severity of violations of freedom of religion or belief. For example, the international crimes that are recognized in the Rome Statute. So genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. How does that map onto freedom of religion or belief? Of course, genocide can and does arise when acts are committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a religious group. War crimes can arise when religious sites are unlawfully attacked and where they are not being used for military purpose. Crimes against humanity arise when there are widespread or systematic attacks against a civilian population, including murder, torture, rape, forcible transfer, and enslavement. And this includes the crime against humanity of religious persecution, widespread and systematic deprivation of fundamental rights based on religious identity. So the mandate has observed and reported on these acts, but really it rests on the shoulder of international criminal lawyers and other entities to take that forward. I think there hasn't been a sufficient sort of sharing of observations by the mandate with other actors in this field. The communication procedures have addressed it, the thematic reports have addressed it, but the mandate has not been at the forefront of taking forward those international crimes on the basis of religion or belief. There is no routine interaction between the mandate and the actors in that field. Egregious violations of freedom of religion or belief perhaps arise, and I'm coming to the end of my comments, perhaps arise because of three hierarchies. So why are there egregious violations of freedom of religion or belief that persist? The hierarchy of rights, separating out freedom of religion or belief from the broader framework of rights protections, is not conducive. As John Grass reminded us earlier today, freedom of religion or belief is inseparable from other rights, including association, assembly, non-discrimination, minority rights, etc. So having a hierarchy of rights separates out freedom of religion or belief from the cluster of rights that are being violated in those egregious violations. Secondly, there seems to be a hierarchy of religions in many instances. So an exclusion of those that are denied the privilege of benefiting from freedom of religion or belief. So that also sort of silences or sidelines egregious violations. And thirdly, and relatedly, a hierarchy of humans using legal sophistry to justify the targeting of persons and communities due to their religion or belief. For example, accusing them of terrorism, national security, or just fear-mongering them. There's even been violations of freedom of religion or belief on the grounds of environmental laws that are blatantly discriminatory but are being hidden under supposed legality. We should respond to the hierarchy of rights by benefiting and recognizing how it's intertwined with other rights protections, for example, torture, child rights, etc. We should respond to the hierarchy of religions by fully recognizing the legal truth that being recognized as a beneficiary of Article 18 is not a declaration of a religion. It's recognizing that Article 18 applies. So we should stop getting over the complication in some national context that we can't, freedom of religion belief can't apply to them because they're not a religion. That's not even an issue that arises under freedom of religion or belief. And thirdly, the hierarchy of humans. This runs against the very premise of human rights. That domestic laws should not be used to deny human rights to others. The challenges of freedom of religion or belief remain extensive around the world, and even the mass violations persist. Although the mandate seeks to respond to these violations, that puts it purely in a reactive mode. What can it do in order to be more proactive and seek to reach out and advance it more proactively? Perhaps this is by reaching out vertically and horizontally. Vertically to domestic actors like parliamentarians, diplomats, student clinics, NGOs and NGO networks. Horizontally to other UN entities and sister agencies and regional mechanisms so that they become more active in defense and promotion of freedom of religion or belief. And maybe we can throw in diagonally to cross-sectoral networks, policy and academic settings that offer cross-sectoral engagement on freedom of religion or belief. The challenges remain enormous. We need to remain vigilant and determined. There are some key challenges that are being addressed in the next day and a half, and I look forward to learning from all of you as to how to maximize the tools we have in securing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghanea, for this comprehensive overview of international current state of freedom of religion. Our next speaker is Jónatas Machado, and he is Professor of International Law at the University of Coimbra, Portugal, and he serves as Executive Director of the IGC Center for Human Rights, and is a member of the Honorary Committee of AIDLR, and we are happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here in a panel presided by Dr. Jens Mohr and in the company of Drs. Nazila, Ghanea, Ibrahim, Salama, and then Serb. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Our theme, between faith, freedom, and heritage, expresses a tension that is no longer theoretical, but structural, existential, and visible across every modern liberal democracy. These societies were built on a promise that freedom of conscience, political equality, and the rule of law could govern collective life without appealing to any single religious tradition. Yet, the deeper we move into the 21st century, the more evident it becomes that liberal democracies are not culturally weightless, nor are they purely procedural machines. Their institutions, moral intuitions, and political aspirations were, historically, shaped by religious narratives, particularly those stemming from Judaism and Christianity. Today, however, the landscape is shifting. Migration has accelerated cultural pluralism, the public sphere is increasingly polarized, and societies struggle to maintain shared frameworks of meaning. Research shows that European debates on migration, despite official secular rhetoric, remain tied to implicit Christian secular identity markers and anxieties about cultural compatibility, especially in relation to Islam. These developments reveal that cultural heritage, even when unacknowledged, still forms part of how societies negotiate freedom and belonging. At the same time, figures who once defined themselves by opposition to religion are now articulating concerns about the erosion of the very Christian cultural frameworks they previously dismissed. Richard Dawkins, for instance, perhaps the most famous contemporary atheist, now openly describes himself as a cultural Christian and expresses discomfort with the visible ascendance of Islamic cultural symbols in historically Christian cities such as London, Oxford, or Cambridge. Such remarks highlight a deeper pattern. Secular liberalism on its own is struggling to provide the symbolic and moral resources needed for collective life. Public intellectuals such as Jordan Peterson and Tom Holland have also contributed significantly to a renewed interest in Christianity, albeit from markedly different angles. Peterson approaches Christianity through a Jungian psychological framework, treating biblical narratives as archetypal maps of meaning rather than supernatural revelation. His recent debates and public interventions show how he uses Christian symbolism to address what he perceives as a contemporary crisis of meaning, presenting Christianity as a reservoir of psychological wisdom capable of grounding identity, responsibility, and moral order in an age of radical individualism. Meanwhile, historian Tom Holland, speaking explicitly from a secular humanist perspective, argues that the moral and political vocabulary of the West, human rights, the dignity of the individual, moral equality, even the very distinction between religion and the secular, is unintelligible without Christianity's transformative impact on Western consciousness. In interviews and public conversations, Holland insists that even unbelievers swim in Christian waters, shaped by assumptions that are far more Christian than Greco-Roman in origin, a realization that led him to rethink the genealogy of modern liberal values. This is the point of departure for our reflection today. We will explore how liberal ideas emerge from religious soil, why they now face moral and existential limits, and how modern democracies might reclaim a form of cultural self-awareness that neither collapses into theocracy nor dissolves into relativism. The liberal democratic project was born from crisis, specifically the crisis unleashed by the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation shattered Europe's theological unity and revealed the catastrophic consequences of tying state power to doctrinal orthodoxy. Political thinkers responded by seeking to separate temporal authority from confessional allegiance, thus giving rise to rights of conscience, religious liberty, and eventually the modern secular state. These developments were anything but neutral. They were grounded in Christian moral anthropology, the dignity of the human person, the accountability of conscience before God, and the inherent worth of each individual life. Even the idea of universal human rights, celebrated today as a secular achievement, is unintelligible without the theological claim that all human beings bear intrinsic value, a claim historically rooted in the Imago Dei tradition. Yet, as liberalism matured, it attempted something far more ambitious, to construct a polity in which religion would be privatized, reduced to personal sentiments, and stripped from political relevance. This This aspiration arose from a fear of sectarian conflict, but it also relied on cultural conditions that were profoundly Christian, precisely the conditions that modern secularism has worked to erode. The limits of this aspiration are increasingly visible today. Studies show that even in highly secular institutions such as the European Union, the official migration discourse continues to reflect implicit religious and civilizational assumptions. The EU's humanitarian language coexists with persistent anxieties about Islam, cultural incompatibility, and social cohesion. This demonstrates what political theorists have been arguing for decades. Liberal neutrality is never purely neutral. It always operates within inherited narratives of identity and meaning. This problem becomes especially acute when states attempt to purge the public sphere of its religious sensibilities while still relying on moral ideas, dignity, equality, and justice that were historically grounded in these same religious traditions. A secular state may proclaim neutrality, but its architecture still reflects centuries of Christian moral formation, whether acknowledged or not. These limitations of the liberal model become especially visible in every social life, in everyday social life, particularly in the growing dissatisfaction many parents express toward public education systems. For these families, the liberal state's promise of neutrality often results not in inclusiveness, but in a value vacuum, where schools seem guided by shifting ideological trends rather than stable moral frameworks. This perception fuels a widespread desire among those who can, or wish they could, to homeschool their children or to place their children in religious schools, not necessarily out of strict doctrinal commitment, but because such institutions and practices are seen as offering clearer identity, stronger community bonds, and a more coherent moral compass. The appeal of religious education in this context reveals a deeper craving for meaning and structure that abstract liberal principles struggle to provide in practice. Modern liberalism is built on universal principles: freedom of conscience, equality before law, individual rights, and the protection of minorities. But these concepts are not self-justifying. They require a moral ecology, a network of cultural assumptions that cannot be sustained by procedural norms alone. The consequences of neglecting this moral infrastructure are now impossible to ignore. The public sphere in many democracies has become increasingly intolerant of dissent, especially on moral, religious, or anthropological questions. Ideological polarization has generated new forms of orthodoxy, enforced not by the church, but by digital mobs, administrative norms, and cultural gatekeepers. As the long detailed examples in contemporary free speech controversies show, censorship today often comes not from theological authorities, but from secular institutions seeking to police identity, morality, and acceptable speech, as thoroughly documented in modern studies of polarized democracies. This is echoed in the surprising rhetorical evolution of Richard Dawkins, as mentioned above. His discomfort signals a broader trend. Even committed secularists intuit that liberal freedom depends on inherited traditions that secularism alone cannot reproduce. The moral limits of liberalism become most apparent when its abstractions collide with social realities. For example, values such as dignity, equality, and justice become unstable when detached from the cultural narratives that once gave them meaning. Without shared moral language rooted in history, societies drift towards either relativism, where no shared good can be articulated, or coercion, where new ideological orthodoxies fill the vacuum left by declining religious frameworks. The most acute pressure point for liberal democracies today is the question of identity in an age of migration. While migration brings dynamism and diversity, it also exposes the fragility of societies that have lost confidence in their cultural foundations. Across Europe, migration policy is shaped not only by economic or humanitarian considerations, but also by profound anxieties about religion, cultural compatibility, and national identity. Despite secular humanitarian language, religious identity remains essential, albeit often implicit factor in debates about integration and social cohesion. These debates are not driven solely by religious conservatives. Secular citizens increasingly express concern about the erosion of Christian cultural heritage and the rise of more assertive religious identities. When mainstream liberal institutions fail to address these concerns, alternative movements emerge, most notably populism and Christian nationalism. This movement springs from a legitimate desire to preserve cultural continuity, shared moral frameworks and historical identity. But Christian nationalism often extends beyond cultural gratitude into exclusionary and authoritarian tendencies. Studies of Christian nationalism in the United States reveal strong correlations with ethno-racial boundaries, hierarchical social visions, and the desire to impose a single religious identity on the nation. Surveys mapping Christian nationalism across states further reveal its demographic concentration among particular religious and political communities, reinforcing its structural influence. These movements, though emerging from understandable concerns, ultimately threaten democratic pluralism. They represent an overcorrection, a reaction to the cultural vacuum produced by radical secularism, but one that risks undermining the very freedoms liberals seek to defend. The challenge, therefore, is to articulate a model that preserves freedom while honoring heritage. This is where the concept of tendential neutrality becomes essential. This model rejects both secular erasure and religious imposition. It acknowledges that Western democracies were shaped by Christian moral foundations and that these foundations continue to support democratic norms such as human dignity, solidarity, justice, and the moral limits placed on power. It allows states to value religious cultural role without mandating belief. It invites religious traditions to contribute openly to public life while ensuring that public authority remains non-confessional. Tendential neutrality affirms that society's moral ecology need not be privatized, sterilized, or stripped of symbolic depth. Rather, it encourages a civic culture that is openly shaped by heritage, yet committed to pluralism. It offers a path in which Christian, Jewish, Muslim, secular, and other religious and humanistic voices can coexist within a shared moral horizon grounded in mutual respect. The tensions between faith, freedom, and heritage are not signs of failure in liberal democracies. They are signs of maturation. They force us to confront the question that modern political theory too often avoids. On what moral foundations does freedom rest? Liberalism inherited a rich moral landscape formed by religious traditions that taught the equal dignity of all persons, the moral obligations of community, and the intrinsic worth of conscience. If these foundations are forgotten, freedom becomes thin, fragile, and easily manipulated. If they are remembered, freedom becomes resilient, capable of welcoming diversity without losing its coherence. The task before us, therefore, is not to choose between faith and freedom, nor between pluralism and heritage. Is to recover the cultural confidence needed to integrate them. A liberal democracy that remembers its story can offer a home to many stories. A society rooted in its heritage can remain open to newcomers. A political community secure in its identity can embrace pluralism without fear. If we navigate these tensions wisely, we will discover that faith, freedom, and heritage are not adversaries, but allies, the three pillars upon which a humane and enduring democratic future can be built. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Machado, for this thought-provoking presentation. Our next topic is titled Political Instrumentalization of Religion and is brought to us by Professor Ibrahim Salama. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the British University of Egypt, and he has over 30 years of multilateral experience, and he served as Ambassador of Egypt to Portugal. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paulo, Mercedes, and all your teams for this great opportunity to, as every year, brainstorm among the authorities in the area of freedom of religion or belief and how it develops in the world. Now, an unavoidable risk of speaking after Professor Nazila and Machado, they cannot maintain your own reasoning. And that's the added value of being together and not just doing it online. And I admire the notion, Professor Machado, of the missing cultural confidence to build a home in many schools. And your denial of the impossibility of reconciling faith, heritage, and freedom. But what does it take? And what is it that blocks it? What does it take? I don't know. I leave it for the discussion. But my topic is one of the blockers of this reconciliation, which is political instrumentalization of religions. I'll try to raise more questions because I think the answers can only come from thinking together as we are doing already. And what I submit is that political instrumentalization of religion is extremely dangerous and extremely complex. I claim that after the hopeful end of the war on Iran, we will see more of this instrumentalization, political instrumentalization of religion, and more consequences of the dinner and on the walk this morning. I was speaking to Adama and to Paulo about the expected, very previsible risk of Shia-Sunni tensions after this war. After all, especially if Iran gets out of this war victorious in one way or another, despite the colossal asymmetry of powers and of armament, we will have so many notions and so many conflicts in terms of the populations and the religious minorities in an area which would remain fragile for indefinite time to come. So it's very important to preventively address this issue. Now, an analogy as a lawyer imposes itself, and I'm really seeking views on whether or not it's the right analogy between attempting to define advocacy to hatred that constitutes incitement, Article 20 of the ICCPR, an attempt which resulted in the Rabat Plan of Action, which defined the threshold for when is it that speech transcends mere irresponsible yet free speech into incitement to hatred. And it took something like 6, 7, 8 years from experts and really a space dedicated by the Office of the High Commissioner and an investment by Navi Pillai at that time, the Durban Review Conference, and it was part of the outcome of the Durban Review Conference, and many of you have been associated to this exercise. Is it correct to make an analogy between the functional definition of incitement in the Rabat Plan of Action, and a probably needed definition of political instrumentalization of religion, or are the two phenomena different in nature? I'm not sure about the answer. I'm putting in a potential analogy: incitement and instrumentalization. Incitement to religious hatred or discrimination on the basis of religion, and politicization of religion. I'm saying this because this war in particular, and the Iranian political system in itself, and just to cite only three examples, the notion of wilayat al-faqih, I don't know how to translate wilayat al-faqih, it's the guardianship of the scholar, or the supremacy of the scholar, of the supreme leader, the notion of exportation of religion, is it an instrumentalization of religion, or is it a free expression? Or is it leveraging a moral authority? Because again, the heritage, where does the heritage stop being a legitimate ownership that you're proud of and you're promoting, which is part and parcel of the freedom of religion? When does it become instrumentalization of religion and destabilization not only of the neighbors but of the whole region, let alone the world? Where is the threshold? Is it a matter of a normative gap or a normative clarity gap? Do we have enough in the hard law and soft law or not? And I will come back to the most advanced, relatively speaking, soft law on the matter and quote the text just to help us all brainstorm together on whether or not we have enough, at least in the soft law. Is the gap normative or just clarity? And also how to link this to the elephant in the room, the crisis of human rights mechanisms at large. You spoke, Professor Machado, about reformation. One of the titles that I was searching for was many of you, and Michael Wiener in particular, and Nazila, when we were walking last night, if one speaks about a title for an article or a research project on the crossroads, human rights at the current crossroads at large, and how it impacts on freedom of religion because it's part of a larger ecosystem. What is it that we need? Is it reform? Is it reformation? Or is it a revolution? And what role for the freedom of religion in particular in this respect? Nazila was, I'm quoting her, hesitantly trying to be positive. I'm not sure I can try to help her in remaining positive or not, but aren't we witnessing a shift from freedom of religion being, as always, at risk, into religion itself, heritage, becoming at risk and becoming a risk in itself, in the sense of moving from instrumentalization of religion into even weaponization of religion? What are we going to do with the heritage of the current war, which only adds to a previous long list of wars where the religion was part of the weapon? When we see this in the heart and the speech and even on the skin of political leaders, that they put symbols to crusades and to religious wars, and what room remains for attempting to be positive, and what is it that is needed to be done? Moving to the current text to try to see whether we need, it's two questions, whether we need, first of all, a hard law, the notion of a convention on banning political use of religion, and there is a draft text circulating and many NGOs working in this direction. Is this the solution? Can we go down that route? Or this would be a total obliteration of one of the three pillars, Professor Machado, which is the heritage. Nobody can deny the heritage. It should be a house of many floors where the heritage takes its rightful place. Nobody can force anybody else to choose between their heritage and their rights and the universal values and international law. They should be all being reconciled. Have we done that homework? Is the unfinished business of human rights completed? Are there attempts to be completed? I recently was very pleasant to see the recent call of the High Commissioner for a Global Alliance of Human Rights. I'm struggling, like you, Nazila, against my not really skepticism, but incapacity to understand Do we have enough ingredients to make such an alliance really an impactful tool to fill the gaps? What if the gaps are of a different nature than what we think they are? I remember vividly 20 years ago when I was joining the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, the narrative at that time was that the era of standard setting is over now, it's only implementation which is needed. And deep inside, I found this a bit too simplistic because the list is very long, exactly as you both described, of the missing pieces of the puzzle of the human rights architecture. Moving back to the texts, I would quote here the Rabat Plan of Action, the Faithful Rights 18 commitments. And in particular, there are 3 areas, 3 cas de figure, where one could approach instrumentalization of religion. That's why it's a moving sand in a way. It's a moving scenery. It's a moving target. These are commitments 7, 10, and 16. Commitment 7 is the most clear-cut. It's the prohibition of incitement to hatred applied to the religious sphere, and it reproduces the Rabat threshold. So if an instrumentalization of religion reaches the threshold and becomes an incitement to religious hatred, that's clear-cut. So that's 1/3 of the approach of the 18 commitments to the phenomena of instrumentalization of religion. But then we also have the positive, if I dare to say positive instrumentalization of religion, which commitment 16 calls it leveraging the moral and the spiritual weight. Here, optimizing, capitalizing on the heritage in the positive sense, finding the right floor in the common home for the heritage to be there without apology about it. It's even a commitment, it's a duty, according to the 18 commitments that were taken by both faith actors and human rights defenders, to leverage the spiritual weight in defending human rights in a different way. The exclusivity by which the human rights community defines itself should no longer exclude faith actors. And I think there is a huge movement in this direction. Faithful rights is only the catalyst of that. It's not the jewel of the crown. It's the convening of so many other initiatives that we all know about and contributed to. So you have 7, you have 16, then the problem remains in the definition in commitment 10. And I'm going to read it to refresh our memory on that. Commitment 10 is precisely, we pledge not to give credence to exclusionary interpretations claiming religious grounds in a manner that would instrumentalize religion's beliefs or their followers to incite hatred or violence, or for example, for electoral purposes or political gains. And these 2 objectives are reflected precisely in point 9 of the statement of this session of the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the AIDLR, adding to them, for example, for regime justification. And I think regime justification is quite, and this is the beauty of soft law, is that you can always illustrate it and refine it better through collective work, or political gains, or electoral processes. When we see superpowers using religion and religious narratives, when you see the Muslim Brotherhood as a political Islam movement, which was part of the controversy in the Middle East, saying something as simple as in 2 words, Islam is the solution. Is this deception for the electorate or not? Now, we fall into the challenge of lawful, but awful but lawful. Some things you cannot disqualify them. Some things you cannot consider them illegal because you have no ground of illegality. Yet, it's clear that they are harmful, oversimplifying, and manipulating the masses. And that's the added value of thinking probably in the direction of commitments rather than prohibitions to be added. And I don't know if we are acting on this sufficiently, or what would be the way to give visibility and respect and promotion to commitments of that kind. And to end on a positive note, despite the long list of questions and the clearly hesitation, I join you, Nazila, to be hesitantly positive, I think that the main way forward is to rely on more education and more prioritization of young faith actors in particular, because by far the impact of faith actors, the youth, in a gender balanced manner is the best way to reach the widest scope of audience and try to reconcile the heritage, faith, and freedom for future generations if we seem to be unable to fix it for the time being. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your engaged address. Thank you. Now we have a comment on all the three speakers given by Dan Serb. Dr. Dan Serb is principal of Newbold College of Higher Education in Great Britain. The floor is yours.
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I wish to begin by my brief commentary or closing remarks for the session by thanking our esteemed presenters for their valuable, informative, and thought-provoking presentations. Now, as you can understand, this is quite a challenge, to comment on these expert presentations. If it looked like I was doing my homework while in class, because I was taking notes all the time, is because that's exactly what I was doing. It was the first time I heard the presentations. And as it usually happens when you are in that situation, you try to copy from the colleagues sitting next to you. But I had no chance. Professor Salama's notes are in, how many languages did you take notes in? And all over the place. But what you did, actually, you gave a very competent commentary on the previous presentations while delivering your own presentation. So I think I could just sit down and, thank you for the comments that you've made. But I won't do that. So let's what I'm going to do is just an overview of the topics that have been presented. And then I will mention from time to time, I'll just make connections to the things that have been said. I believe we can all agree that the world we live in is getting more complex and more unpredictable by the day. And what was mentioned was migration, for example. This unpredictability especially makes the universal recognition and protection of freedom, and implicitly religious freedom, in the least uneven across the world. Thus the need for creating awareness and advocacy, even adequate definition of terms, as Professor Ghanea has mentioned, to define the term freedom of religion and belief. And you've also mentioned this can be achieved through partnership between institutions and disciplines. Now, what is complicating the matter is that even the very subject matter that we're discussing, and that is religion. What was mentioned was the privatization of religion, which was an ideal, or maybe an idea, probably better said, mentioned by Peter Berger, sociologist Peter Berger, at the end of the previous millennium. And he was very convinced that this was going to happen. And then he had to change his mind and acknowledge that actually religion was flourishing. He was talking a lot about the rise of fundamentalism. So religion still prospers. And that is probably because of what Jonathan Sacks would call the persistence of faith. So we may even need to define or redefine religion itself, or the place of religion in society. Now, coming back to the current state of freedom of religion and belief, in many countries people enjoy broad protections still. And this is a statement I wrote previously, and then I realized I have to revisit. Democracies in regions such as Europe, North America, and parts of Latin America have legal frameworks that safeguard religious diversity and protect minority beliefs. I don't think we can make that kind of general statements anymore. And probably we should say they have legal frameworks that are meant to safeguard religious diversity and protect minority beliefs. Migration, once again, multiculturalism, religious pluralism is changing the landscape. It's changing the way even democracies relate to the issue of religion. Now, still, in many parts of the world, individuals can openly express their faith or lack of it without fear of punishment. But what is of note is that in these societies, freedom of belief is often tied to broader freedoms, such as freedom of speech and assembly. And again, this has been mentioned, and I think it's very important to understand that when we speak about the freedom of belief, we don't speak about it in isolation. Now, however, this is not the global norm. And again, as it was mentioned, in several parts of the world, restrictions on belief remain severe. Governments may impose official religions, limit conversions, or punish what they consider blasphemy or heresy. In some cases, individuals face imprisonment, discrimination, or even violence simply for practicing their beliefs or questioning dominant ideologies. Religious minorities are often the most vulnerable. Communities may be denied access to education, employment, or political participation. Places of worship can be restricted or destroyed. In extreme cases, persecution forces people to flee their homes, contributing to global refugee crisis. It is also important to recognize that freedom of belief is not only about religion, and this was mentioned even this morning. It includes the right to hold philosophical and personal convictions. Around the world, people who identify as non-religious or who express dissenting views can face stigma or even legal consequences. Another growing concern is the rise of social and political polarization and the instrumentalization of religion, as it was also mentioned a bit earlier on. Even in countries with strong legal protections, individuals may experience pressure, discrimination, or hostility due to their beliefs. Online spaces, and this is the place where a lot is happening. And this morning we heard about the impacts the use of AI is having. Online spaces, while offering platforms for expression, have also amplified intolerance and misinformation. So what does this mean for us? First, it reminds us that freedom of belief is not guaranteed. It must be actively protected. Laws matter, but so do attitudes. Respecting this freedom requires more than tolerance. It requires a commitment to pluralism, dialogue, and mutual understanding. And I think the first one sometimes people have a problem with, because we feel that our narrative is the true one. But we need to ensure that we are committed to and protect pluralism. Second, it calls for global awareness and responsibility. International organizations, governments, and civil society all play a role in monitoring violations and advocating for those whose voices are suppressed. Once again, partnership. And finally, it challenges each of us personally. And once again, Professor Ghanea has mentioned this before. Freedom of belief is not only about defending our own rights, but also about defending the rights of others, especially those with whom we may disagree. In conclusion, the current state of freedom of religion and belief in the world is a story of both progress and struggle. While many enjoy this essential freedom, millions still live without it. That is why speaking about it and guarding it matters. There is no question that current interests will change. Therefore, we need to be resolved in our efforts and continue to stand for principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Serb. Now we have a couple of minutes for questions and answers, and I invite you all to participate. You can stand up and ask your question or give your comment, and maybe there is a presenter you want to directly address, and I will invite him or her to come to the front here, to the microphone. But anyway, it's your possibility now to ask questions or give comments. Are there any questions to the presenters or comments on what they said? Please feel free. Oh, we have microphones. That's fine. That's good. Okay. Yeah. Anastasia Hartmann, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentations. I was nodding most of the time. I couldn't agree more with a lot of points that you raised. Thank you so much. What resonated with me a lot was the final comment that you, Ibrahim, made about FORB and education, how important it is to actually introduce this concept early on and to teach the next generation about freedom of religion or belief. In fact, that's one of the topics that we currently discuss at OSCE panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief. I'm part of it, humbly, for the next 3 years. And it's one of the things that we are working on, how to introduce FORB in education. So I wanted to hear your views, but also the views of other panelists, because you belong to the education world. Whether you think that introducing freedom of religion or belief from international perspective is the most effective approach, or would other approaches be more effective, or would it depend on the context? So would be curious to hear.
Thank you for your question. Maybe
my two
Salama.
sentences very simply is that we do not give enough attention to the damage done by the misperception of paragraph 5 of the Vienna Declaration on Program of Action, which implicitly considers religion to be a liability or to be a synonymous of relativism. And I think with this, the war between secular fanatism and religious fanatism becomes an unholy alliance. And can only untackle this, you cannot rewrite the VDP. Nobody can open anything in human rights standards. Politically speaking, it's suicidal. But it's through education and that develops critical thinking and provides case studies. We organized in Egypt from last February the first attempt for a peer learning for young faith actors on the tensions between religion and human rights, tensions and complementarities. And we decided to change the title after math. The title was Complementarity Between Religion and Human Rights. And our lesson was to add a question mark after the title, just to give you a notion of how educators keep learning with time as well.
Any more comments from the side of presenters? This question? No? Okay.
I won't go into the pedagogy. I think Ibrahim has addressed that well. But I will add that I think some of the education is within. I'm not saying international human rights law is the one that wins hearts and minds. Obviously, these discussions and exchanges and assessments and reflections should take place everywhere, including in religious settings, within communities, between communities, etc. But some of the education is also in international human rights law. So a lot of the reports that I've prioritized have been to encourage joint thinking between, for example, freedom of religion or belief and the prohibition of torture treatment, or freedom of religion or belief and people on the move. So, it's freedom of religion or belief is not separate from the plight of migrant workers and their families, of asylum seekers and refugees, and internally displaced persons. So let's weave together these human rights. Let's understand the freedom of religion or belief dimension of peace. Let's understand the freedom of religion or belief dimension of the deceased. What does one do in terms of the deceased and honoring the deceased? So trying opening lenses that brings us together rather than makes freedom of religion or belief special, exclusive, or separate. Because, in that way, we can, by bringing us together, we can understand it. The freedom of religion or belief lens can become relevant, I agree with Ibrahim that many other entities, they hear the word religion and they shy away from it. Whereas freedom of religion or belief is relevant to so many aspects of daily life, whether it's thought, conscience, or religion.
Okay.
I have a question for Professor Machado if there's silence from the floor, but otherwise I will wait.
Okay, so over there is a question. Mm-hmm. Professor Gunn, please. There's a microphone coming. Yeah, sorry.
I'll try and be just a little bit contrarian. I remember when I was sitting in my Introduction to International Politics course where the professor said, Voltaire will be remembered for having made the statement, if you want to debate with me, first define your terms. And so I remember very vividly where I was sitting writing that down. Later, after the internet was invented, I learned that Voltaire said no such thing, but he should have said such a thing. Too often, I think, we let our arguments be based upon our use or understanding of terms rather than explaining the terms. Now, Peter Berger is not here to defend himself, so I'm going to use him as a vehicle. But this would go to the term religion, it would go to the term liberalism, it goes to the term secularism. So just taking Peter Berger, where he says, okay, I used to believe that we were having an increase in secularism, but now I see that religion has come back in revenge against it. So I asked Peter Berger, who's obviously not here to defend himself, well, what do you mean by religion? If you mean, are people becoming more pious? Are they becoming kinder to others? Are they using religion to try to foster better relations with other people? Are they becoming? Are they fasting more? These are all actions that would be taking place in the name of religion. Is the world becoming more religious? And if you mean by that, then you're certainly wrong, Peter Berger. If you mean by the world is becoming less secular, and you mean by that, well, what about religions taking over means of mass communication and using those to propagandize others? What about conflicts being enhanced in the name of religion? My God says I should do this, or my religion says I should do this. Well, Peter Berger, do we have an increase in secularization, that religions taking secular terms, taking weapons, taking violence, taking mass media, and using that to advance their cause? Then certainly you, Peter Berger, were wrong. So we shouldn't be letting our facile use of terms be doing the heavy lifting in an argument.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I thought it was a comment. Okay, good, thank you. And there's a question over here, please. Yeah, can we have a microphone, a working microphone, please? Okay.
Well, thank you to Nazila, because Nazila tries to make a summary at the last intervention, and thanks to Jeremy and the rest of the panelists, of course. I think all of you try to put on the table the same idea. The idea is that the language of F or B is useless today. It looks like that, no? I mean, we are using a language that is not useful, that is not suitable for the processes that we have to encounter. That is not the language. We have been, most of the people around, been working for the last 30 years on the same uses. And I see that we didn't gain, okay? I mean, we haven't done that sort of Nazila's argument, go further, go forward. We need to move forward. It's not the same language than the declaration language. I love the declaration language, but it's not. Because, I mean, it's like if freedom of religion or belief has gone into a process and the context has moved. We don't have the same context that at the beginning of the millennium. Now we have different contexts. I mean, it's like we need to suffer a process of accommodating. I like the word accommodation. I mean, freedom of religion, the language, freedom of religion and belief, has to accommodate to different geopolitical changes, different contexts. Populism, nationalism, it's something that we need to perceive. And minorities, of course, religious minorities too. And torture, we need to open our lens. That's the point. And that is why I say, why don't we try to make a sort of, this is, for me, this is a challenge. This sort of, challenge Paolo and the team has put on the table, because it's really very hard. Okay, there are many issues that are come under our interest, but we need to think of the language. If the language is useful or not. What sort of language are we using? okay, to try to look for solutions, because we all try to look for solutions. Sorry, I don't know what you think about it.
Okay, now we just ask, is there any comments on this you said? Any comments?
I think we need to be thoughtful about it and see where we gain traction, where we gain allies, where we grow the community of freedom of religion belief supporters. We need to build bridges with others because the resources are, well, first of all, we shouldn't become introverts or inward-looking, not introverts. You can be introverts if you want to be. Just to be speaking amongst ourselves, it needs to land and engage with others and other actors. So I agree.
Probably to add one sentence, maybe one of the origins of this problem is what I call the disconnected triangle between the law, culture, and religions. Lawyers are too legalistic. Culture is seen to be relativist. If one believes paragraph 5 would have been the Declaration Program of Action. And probably the problem is that there is no one of the three value systems that is capable alone of reconciling freedoms and rights intentions. Maybe we need to open up this triangle. But for many human rights conservatives, I didn't say human rights mullahs, or fundamentalists, this would be reopening human rights for a catastrophe. I don't know.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Do you want to comment on that?
If there's no other, but otherwise others.
Okay. I don't see a hand, so you're right. Go ahead. Okay, one hand. Okay, so let's hear your question or comment.
I can speak in English, but I prefer speak in Spanish because it's more easy for me. I have a better translator, and I will say thank you very much for this afternoon. Llevamos, en mi caso, más de 30 años trabajando sobre libertad religiosa. Llevamos escuchando culto y cultura. Llevamos escuchando colisión de la libertad religiosa frente a otros derechos.
We've been working more than 30 years about with the topic of freedom of liberty of religion, and we've been talking about cult and culture, and also collision and other rights altogether.
But the problems are the same, because if you go to the Brazilian, los problemas son los mismos. The problems are the same. They're near to me. Los problemas son los mismos. Si vamos a el carnaval de Río de Janeiro, podemos ver a Jesucristo perseguido por un diablo, a Jesucristo vestido por una persona transexual.
He's saying the problems are the same. If we ever go to the carnival in Rio de Janeiro, we can see Jesus Christ persecuted by a devil, or we can also see Jesus Christ by a homosexual person.
El mismo cartel que difunde unas fiestas patronales en Palma de Mallorca, en España.
And it's exactly the same thing that's happening in the local celebrations in Spain, in a local community.
Pero ¿cuándo vamos a afirmar que la cultura está representada por el patrimonio inmaterial que nuestra religión, todas, vienen dejando poco a poco en cada uno de los ciudadanos que conforman los pueblos? ¿Y cuándo vamos a reclamar que el derecho fundamental de libertad religiosa, cuando entra en conflicto con otros derechos, sea especialmente protegido como el hijo mayor de la Constitución?
So he's saying that we have to acknowledge that when we have the heritage comes together with small pieces of culture that comes along the way, and then this is an immaterial heritage that we have. And when are we going to protect or proclaim that the freedom of religion is an older brother that has to be defended regardless of other human rights might be underneath big human right?
Thank you. This was the question. Thank you. Some comments on this question.
I think we are always striving for the right balance. It's not easy, but as Swiss alchemist Paracelsus used to say, the difference between the medicine and the poison is in the dose. So I think we have to always look for the balance between different rights and freedoms and interests, and it's a daily challenge. So because something that might be a good idea in the right dose becomes a very bad idea if we exaggerate. So it's important to strike the right balance.
I didn't fully understand it, but I'll use it as an opportunity to ask Professor Machado a question that there might not even be a time to answer for. I'm very happy to entertain the idea that we have gone too far, that maybe some recalibration of Jeremy's definition of religion, that we should encourage kindness, respect in public discourse, right? I don't have any, I think that's welcome. But I don't know what the recalibration will look like. So are we going to recognize one part of the world as needing to be particularly respectful of Hindu civilization, another part of the world, Muslim civilization, another Christian values and civilization? So are we creating sort of civilizations and saying that we need to give deference or some higher respect to the cultural values in that context? And then in other contexts, then there will be the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Christian, the Muslim. And do we restrict freedom of religion or belief? We know in all parts of the world, the number of Pentecostals goes up, the number of Catholics go down, the number of Shia goes up, the number of Sunni goes down. I mean, that's also part of life. So what will that do to the dynamism of change? And in terms of migration, are we saying that migrants, so Emirates, 90% are non-citizens. So will there be a deference, or in Qatar, it might even be 5% are citizens, right? So, will the 95% then give a deference to the original culture? And what will be the indigenous religion where there has been so much flux? So I'm interested in entertaining the idea of some recalibration, more space for religious values to be able to be freely expressed in public life. But I don't understand what the difference will look like. But perhaps we will have time, or I don't know if there's
you
time
want
for...
to give a quick answer?
No, it's a very complex question and complicated. But for instance, I did this year. Last year I was both in China and in Saudi Arabia, and I went to and I had the opportunity of experience the need to respect a certain culture. For instance, in visiting a Buddhist temple or in interacting with people from Saudi Arabia, Islamic people. So I think there has to be a respect for culture, for heritage. When I go there, appreciate, while at the same time expecting respect for my convictions and things like that. But I think when you are dealing with a big culture, sometimes a centuries-old culture, I think you really need to have some deference. Of course, that will depend on context, and it will be probably fluid, I would say. But it's very complex. We don't have time to deal with it.
Okay. Thank you.